And we are live. Welcome, people. Today I'm willing to spend time with you. Well, it's bullshit, really, but I'm going to talk to you guys about PTSD. And no, for a change, I'm not really going to talk to you about PTSD. I found someone who can talk about PTSD from experience, which, let's be honest, is far more valuable. I introduce to you Dogbath.
Hello, YouTube. How are you?
And not just Dogbath is with us, Smirkus was here too, because, well, when we're talking about psychological afflictions, Smirkus has a deep well of interest he can share from as well. Well, maybe not as deep, but he knows his shit as well. So the three of us are going to talk about PTSD. We're going to do this because not too long ago, Russian Deadpool, you know the guy, skeptic feminist, shot his girlfriend, and the first messages that went out was, well, yeah, but he had PTSD. And, well, I personally thought that's crap, but Dogbath actually stood up and said, this is not even crap, this is worse. We need to stop this. People shouldn't think about PTSD in this way. And I totally agree with him. So I'm going to give the platform to Dogbath so he can tell you all why.
Well, hello everybody. I'm a veteran. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. I'm mostly just a shitposter in the comments section. But I did hear about the Russian Deadpool, people making excuses, maybe not excuses, but trying to rationalize the murder as being PTSD somehow caused it or contributed to it. Both of which I guess I got a little triggered by because there's quite a bit of stigma with veterans and PTSD where they won't seek help because they don't want to be seen as dangerous. And there's a lot of elements to that. There's people who lose child custody cases because they were veterans. And if they got help for PTSD, then they have mental issues and actually lose child custody cases. There's infringements on Second Amendment rights that are targeted at disabled veterans because PTSD is considered an easy, oh, well, that's obvious. There's the concerns about terrorism watch lists and no-fly lists. Disabled veterans get put on those lists and have to get off of them. And a lot of it comes from the stigma about veterans with PTSD being dangerous. And, well, veterans aren't all saints, but certainly not dangerous, and certainly having those kind of mental health issues should not be something that people jump to. You are dangerous as far as a judgment. And then I guess the other elements of Koplikov's military record came quite a bit into question, as most of it was smoke he was blowing up people's asses, apparently.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a moment as well, because that is a big deal, actually. I mean, he talked a good fight, so the saying goes, but in reality, he was trying to gain fame without doing the work.
So by playing a character of himself.
Yeah. But let's before we go into him too much, let's stay on topic with PTSD, because it is an interesting topic to say the least. Because, well, I mean, PTSD is a big problem, and a lot of people are suffering from PTSD. But the idea that PTSD is this sort of be ready because someone might snap and then they kill people around them, that just isn't reality.
Isn't that a whole separate related issue?
Well, if it is an issue at all, yes, it's a separate issue. Now, it is true that people with PTSD can have aggression management problems. But someone being aggressive or someone being a murderer are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are talking about how someone snapped and then started killing people, people with PTSD, don't get me wrong, it's possible that people with PTSD kill people, but if they do, they usually kill themselves and people around them that they care about. And not because he's aggressive, but because he wants out. Mind you, I am using the he form in this because when this happens, it's usually a male person.
And one of the things I found, I don't know, that bothered me about how the narrative played out was I was seeing a lot of the YouTubers and such, the men's rights activists, or at least men's rights slacktivists on Twitter and YouTube. No offense if they're contributing, but some of them it seems like they're mostly contributing to Twitter. But that they ran with this and came up with examples of veterans being violent because of PTSD, as if this somehow was the case or made the case make sense. Because these unexpected violence, I get that people want to make it make sense right away. There was this guy, he was on streams with people and he had debates and he was in the Twitter zeitgeist, I guess, or the Twitter sphere of communication with people, and people wanted to understand why this really unexpected violence took place, and they just jumped on this, oh, he was Rambo. He was... I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. If we look at Rambo, Rambo's character has been portrayed as a PTSD character as well. But how was it PTSD? I mean, he fought back against people. If we look at the first Rambo movie, when he started fighting the law enforcers of that place, it wasn't PTSD. Or it could have been triggered by PTSD, but everything he did since wasn't PTSD. I mean, he just fought the law enforcers because he didn't agree with them.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
and it's also just a movie. I mean,
well, yeah, there is that.
And not a terrible movie. I mean, it showed a veteran with some depth, at least the first one. If you could understand Sylvester Stallone while he's crying and talking at the same time.
Well, it is true though, and this especially came out during the later Rambo movies, where his character created a lot more depth because, well, he actually made choices based on the fact that he felt hurt and he didn't want to feel hurt again. I mean, if we look at, I think it was the third one when he was in Thailand, where he lived as a monk for a while because he felt more at ease. Life was less triggering for him. Now, if anyone has the right to talk about being triggered, it are people with PTSD, because it is actually a triggering existence. And a lot of things can trigger you. But when they trigger you, you don't become a homicidal maniac. No.
Yeah.
You become... No, actually, you described it best yourself, Dogbath. What happens to you when you become triggered?
Well, it's like they call it hypervigilance, and it's not. Even that sounds more combat focused than it actually is. I find myself in things like crowds or in traffic. I'm paying attention to too many things at once, and it just gets a little overwhelming, and you start to get the anxiety attacks. But even that, I don't think a lot of people understand what's happening. It's like, how to explain it?
My uncle explained it to me like it's what we as civilians would call slightly paranoid. You're checking every exit, you're checking the crowd, sizing everybody up. If you hear a loud noise, it can make you very uncomfortable. depending on how you've dealt with your trauma or with the war experiences and stuff.
Well, it can be that have some paranoia elements to it, but I don't find myself getting fearful in crowds. I find myself getting overwhelmed with crowds. It's easy to click back into that how do I say, soldier mindset, and realize that nobody's in the uniform that you would depend on around you, so you get really isolated in big crowds because you're remembering that you don't have soldiers on both sides of you looking out for you in a way. Even if it's not a scary situation, like even if you're walking down the aisles of a grocery store, sometimes it'll just click that you realize that you're on your own in that grocery store. Not necessarily that the checkout girl's gonna attack you or anything like that, but you'll get this feeling that you're paying attention to too much, and realizing that you're paying attention to all of it because you're alone in that situation, even though you're not even necessarily alone. You'd be there with friends, but if they're not soldiers, or they weren't soldiers, they can't relate to what's going on with you. See, there's a lot of sudden isolation that you become aware of while paying attention to doors and angles and all kind of stuff. And it's different for different people. And maybe people do have more of a combat reaction to it, a survival reaction to it. But a lot of what I notice from it is just a sudden burst of stress and isolation.
Yeah.
That is.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. The Eldritch Code is giving rather a good explanation, if I may. Well, it's hard to explain in less than 200 characters, of course, but the triggered aspect means it's an implicit, not an explicit memory. So you have something in your head, a memory. You cannot conjure it up yourself. Something happens in your surrounding, and because of that thing that happens in your surrounding, you revert into a certain mindset. I'm not quite sure if reverting is a good word I'm using here. I'm sorry if it's the wrong word. But you bring yourself, not consciously, but unconsciously, in, as you say yourself, in your case, a hyper state of awareness. And you suddenly are aware of everything around you. It doesn't automatically mean you conceive everything as a threat, but you are at the ready. Do I translate it right? Well, Carlos and Eldritch were talking about this in the chat as well, and this is something we see too. Now, especially among former soldiers, but also among men on average, we see this form of PTSD a lot. On the women and children up to a certain age, we also see avoidance or flight responses a lot. We know, for example, that agoraphobia, the fear to go outside, is a form of PTSD, which is of course extreme. I mean, there have been people known to suffer from agoraphobia who actually do not leave their house just because it's too triggering for them. And I mean, I know we use the word as a joke amongst people from the SJW ilk or feminists, and we say, haha, you're triggered, haha. But triggering is actually a real thing, and it actually affects people in a real way. And now, don't get me wrong, if I'm talking before or over you, Dogbath, but I'm pretty sure that even though you can recognize when you're being triggered, in hindsight, you're not avoiding those triggers yet. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this stream talking about it.
Oh, yeah, well, maybe this is kind of therapy for me.
Well, maybe.
But yeah, and the other thing, the PTSD jokes and the Twitter PTSD, it is funny. It is jokes. It's I guess I was just trying to bring it up that PTSD does not equal dangerous to society. You know, there's something else going on. You can't just get PTSD and then there's no... Koplikov did not suddenly find himself back in Nam fighting Charlie when he shot his girlfriend. You know,
No.
that's not what happened.
No,
I can't imagine a situation where that would have been what happened, and that's what people ran with.
PTSD. Yeah, that's the Rambo PTSD. Oh, okay, he's triggered, and the cop suddenly talked to him, so he felt that he was a soldier back from Nam, and now he had to fight the police officers. That is a PTSD version. That is not PTSD. Hell, I wouldn't even call it schizophrenic anymore. I would call that downright crazy.
I do have a question about all this stuff. Because when referred or just looked up some things about PTSD real quick, and it does talk about flashbacks and stuff, but I don't know really. Yeah, how does that relate? I guess.
Well, flashbacks are kind of like. Well, I can only speak to what I've experienced. Really, it's kind of like a. I've had visual flashbacks where you see something and you know that's not what's there, and it's so. I was very aware that it was a hallucination of sorts, but it's but it wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like I was back in Nam with Charlie. You know, it was I saw the memory of a situation that happened. I saw it as like almost a like a double exposure film over what was actually going on. And
Right.
it was scary because it was so
Vivid.
powerful enough to be visual, you know, but it wasn't like I thought I was in a different place, you know, than I actually was. Now, I understand that some people, it could be that bad, but
I wanted to share with you guys, and I have to broadcast myself a bit. How do I do that? I'm always good at this shit. I wanted to share with you guys the National Center for PTSD of the U.S. Department of Veterans. And if we scroll down here, and you can see my mouse here. Haha, I have two screens. I can do this now. Basically, the first part says this, and I think this is very important. It is normal to have stress reaction after a traumatic event. This is something people often seem to forget. Your emotions and behavior can change in ways that are upsetting to you. Even though most people have stress reaction following from trauma, eventually you might get better at it. I mean, they get better in time is an oversimplification in my humble opinion, but you should always seek help. Basically, this is the be-all and end-all of it, to my humble opinion. It's a response of your mind and of your body to extreme stress.
Yeah.
And in all fairness, servicemen, especially active servicemen, do come into situations where, you can talk about extreme stress.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, a lot of it, just from the service end, is the not individual events. It's a long period of time of being under stress that I think makes it somewhat different than an individual event.
Mm-hmm.
Individual events might be a little bit different, but it can also just be a grind on you.
Yep.
That you don't realize you're rewiring yourself to be overly vigilant.
Yeah, that's what they talk about too. There are basically 4 types of PTSD. Reliving the event, re-experiencing, which happens in nightmares or flashbacks, or when you hear something. This is, for example, what Carlos talked about in the chat, that he had a family member that relived whenever he heard a loud bang, he was at the ready because he thought there was gunfire. Now, avoiding situations that remind you of the events. In the worst case scenario, we're talking about agoraphobia. This you see a lot. Don't get me wrong, men have this too, but this is something you will find far more among children and women. Negative changes in beliefs and feelings. Well, yeah, that can be true for just about everything. And feeling keyed up, also called hyperarousal or hypersensitivity. And this is what you've been talking about, Dogbath. And these forms of PTSD, mind you, if I read these four, you will find that none of them say the urge to kill people.
Yeah.
So I 100% agree with Dogbath on how it's pretty much bullshit to say that people kill because of PTSD.
The Eldridge God made a pretty good point. He said, we are actually looking into the future with hardwired behavior to catch thrown items, or he used thrown items as an example. In effect, the same implicit memories that trigger PTSD are the same memories we use to react with speed.
Yeah, that's true. It's basically it's the same nervous center where our language is housed. Some people would call it our lizard brain.
Mm.
It's the part of the brain where we think without thinking, or we act without thinking.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's often referred to as our lizard brain. It's the oldest part. It's usually the stem. It's the oldest part. And the problem, as the Eldritch is saying, the problem is how do we undo bad implicit memories? For this, we have no answer yet. But we do find that with therapy and time, we can, how do I say this correctly? Bring it back to a normal feeling of, discomfort, but no longer overtaking our emotions. The more we learn, if we realize what our PTSD is, and with the right help, we can place the memories that cause PTSD into our active memory and out of our responsive memory. I'm using the wrong words, but I can't remember the right terms for it. This is, for example, where EMDR is being used for. It's a therapy form. Usually it's used for different forms of PTSD, but for traumatic events in the past, which in all fairness is what PTSD is.
Oh, yeah. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, EMDR. Which, in all fairness, for the fuck of me, I can't understand how it works. And I've had a small training in how it works, and for the fuck of me, I can't understand. But at the same time, I have to admit that I notice for a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people, it is effective. It's also very tiring once someone has a EMDR training or
therapy. Fuck up the rest of the day.
Yeah, they are, and you have no idea that simple talking could be so exhausting. But people often are, that was their day. But eventually, it does work. So this is speaking to all the people out there who actually do suffer from PTSD. Do try to find help. There is a way around it. It's easier said than done, though. But it is within our reach. But why did we come to this one? Because the bullshit about Russian Deadpool killing his girlfriend, which is a terrible incident, and then people basically saying, yeah, but he has PTSD, so it's okay. Now, no one ever would have said, okay, this ex-soldier killed someone, it's PTSD, it's okay. And of course they wouldn't, because you shouldn't. Killing someone is never okay. But the worst part is the soldiers that do suffer from PTSD don't go out killing people. But that idea seems to be in people's minds. And that's a problem.
Well, to be somewhat fair, I don't think anyone was saying it was okay because he had PTSD. I think people were trying to rationalize it. Like, this is someone who they have had conversations with. This is something they didn't expect. And they jumped at PTSD as a rationalization for how such a thing could be possible, even though, as far as I'm aware, this is just some dude on the internet, that people had conversations with, and they were having to find a way to understand what he had done. And they jumped on the PTSD and they jumped on the mushrooms, and
and that's
just
the mushrooms. I'm willing to give the mushrooms a higher score than PTSD. Yes, probably the mushrooms had something to do with it. I mean, if you're high as a kite, your movements and your motivations become inebriated, and you might do stuff you normally wouldn't do.
Mushrooms isn't really a normal high, if you ask me, though, because you're just fucking hallucinating, usually tripping balls.
Yeah, but out of those tripping balls,
there's many more stories like that with people on psychoactive drugs that think that suddenly there's a devil next to them and they end up killing their sons or wives or whatever.
True. But that's not PTSD.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that drugs could possibly be an explanation.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't justify it, but...
Yeah, it could be an explanation, but it has to be in the person. Well, no, it doesn't have to be in the person. But in case of Russian Deadpool, I'm sorry. I mean, everyone who had interacted with him or who saw him act, I'm not surprised that he was becoming as aggressive as he did. And then where people, and okay, they didn't excuse it with PTSD, but they tried to make it, how is it?
Tried to make it make sense to them.
Yeah, and PTSD is not an explanation.
Yeah. And then there was the stolen valor angle.
Stolen valor?
Stolen valor.
Basically,
stolen valor is where. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, mate. You brought it up. I talk a lot.
Oh, well, stolen valor is basically when you pretend to be a soldier, or you pretend. I guess the real legal definition would be wearing medals you weren't awarded, or wearing uniforms, kind of defrauding that you were a soldier or some kind of war hero and playing it up to get drinks at the bar or something.
Oh, right.
Or just get attention. And but in general, he seems to have made up most of his military record. And or maybe people made it up for him to make it make sense, because I'm not even sure how much actually came from him. But he wasn't in training long enough to actually be a active soldier.
No, he only had basic training. He had basic training. He would have gone to college or uni, and after that he would have enlisted, if I understood right. So basically, he was no more than National Guard.
If that was ROTC, ROTC, he would have done a basic training and sort of been in reserves throughout his college, and then he would be commissioned. He wouldn't enlist. He'd be commissioned after that. But it wouldn't be a period of 2 years, and if he had actually enlisted instead of done like a ROTC, which I'm not sure he did, but if he had actually enlisted, he would have done basic training and then a follow-on school to learn his job for the Army.
I'm not sure if he was a ROTC, but what I understood from how I understood it is that he did basic training, and he should have probably gone to more acute training after, I think, university. But for the time being, he was a reserve in the National Guard, something like that. But he didn't really have anything more than basic training. So
Yeah.
he wouldn't even be a grunt, because a grunt has more than just basic training.
And given if you just have basic training, likely you just washed out of basic training.
Yeah.
If you didn't go to any follow-on school. And sometimes the reserves do different things, like they keep people on the staff and adjust training to their schedule, but he wouldn't have been deployable. He basically would have had a drill sergeant teach him how to make the bed. Not that basic training isn't a lot of effort, but basically that's how much he learned. He learned how to properly make a bed and get yelled at.
Yeah. But go ahead, mate. I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Oh, he would have had a longer period of training to have even been, how do you say, a private.
Yeah,
a rifleman would have had a follow-on school.
I don't think he would
truck
ever
driver
made it.
would have had a follow-on school.
Yeah, I don't think he would ever made it to rifleman. In all fairness, in the Netherlands we have Section 5. And I think Smirkers knows what I mean with Section 5.
Nope.
Okay, well, someone who is Section 5 is unable for military duty for physical or physiological or psychological reasons.
That probably would have been me.
Maybe, okay, I'm going to say maybe. But if I look at the guy and the way he acted on YouTube and the way he was aggressive, I would think this guy would be a Section 5. I don't know how they call it in America, though. But you have people who want to become soldiers who are simply not in the right set of mind.
So basically just unfit for duty.
Unfit for duty. And to me...
Yeah, I guess
Go ahead, mate.
Oh, I guess they call it Section 8.
Okay,
At least they do in the movies. But if that happened in training, they'd probably just got washed out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure it would have even risen to the level of they found out that he was unable.
Well,
just because he was in there for such a short period of time.
Not true that, but he was right.
I'm making an assumption about how much I actually know about his military record.
I know nothing about his military record. I'm not going to argue that, but I know how do you call it? I know the way he's acting on the YouTube, or I know how I saw him act. And basically his behavior is what we call in Dutch overschreeuwen. He's
being a loudmouth.
He's more than being a loudmouth. He's making himself into a character, and he's making himself bigger and bigger and bigger. And sooner or later, he has to put his money where his mouth is.
Yeah.
And that's when they start making aggressive acts towards people around them. And this is unfortunately what happened. Yes, it also coincides with him using substance, but it was already in the personality. So where I am truly sorry for everyone who lost someone in the incident, the dude was unhinged, and he was so well before this happened. I think that's the best way to say it. Okay, Section 5 is medical. Section 8 was crazy as hell, according to Eldridge. Well, Eldridge, where are you from, mate? Are you from Europe or America? Okay, that's going to take some time for him to respond. I'm not going to wait.
Well, a buddy of mine actually, I was telling him that I was going to be doing the stream. And yeah, I guess there's actually stories of people who got PTSD when they got out, more or less because of what Dogbath said, the extreme isolation all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
Never seen combat, never any of that, but they got out and suddenly it's like, oh, I'm not living shoulder to shoulder with people anymore.
which is true too. I mean, we can see this, for example, in
I was
ex-convicts
like,
as well.
that actually happens? Okay. Learn something
It's
new every day.
it's a big change of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Being in the military is
Yeah.
surprisingly different than not being in the military. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This-
But yeah, this is something we see in ex-convicts as well, to be honest.
Hmm.
I know this from the Netherlands because I worked in how do you call it?
Correctional facility.
Yeah, that's how they call it in America, but that's not really what it is. But yeah, in a prison. Let's call it a prison for lack of better word. But yeah, sometimes when people came out of prison, they also had to readjust to their new lifestyle. And I wouldn't really call it PTSD, but it did affect them. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And because you have to readjust to a lifestyle that's completely different. I know a bunch of soldiers in the Netherlands, and some of them went from working for the defense ministry, and they stopped working for the defense ministry and headed into how do you call it, private contracting or normal companies, and they call it civilian life, and they really have a problem adapting. They adapt eventually. Everyone does. I'm not willing to call that PTSD though, but yeah, they have a problem adapting to a different lifestyle because civilians live different than soldiers do. This is why, for example, in America, you have whole, well, almost cities basically with military personnel.
Hmm.
Have you lived on one of those cities, Dogbath?
I mean, cities of military person? You mean like forts?
No, not like forts. I forgot those names. They're not solely for military personnel, but people live there with their families. But just everyone in a square mile has ties to the military.
Oh well,
You have
on bases or forts. You got Fort Sill, Fort Benning.
Yeah, those
Fort
are forts.
Hood.
But you
Yeah.
actually have. I forgot.
Yeah,
those
you'll end
names.
up with like a military ghetto around there.
Yeah, something like that.
We call it a ghetto, but it's not really necessarily a ghetto. Some parts are pretty bad, but yeah, you'll end up with a whole neighborhood around the base for people who are just living off base or working on base, so they'll be close to it because.
Yeah. So you can see that even in those areas, military life has an influence on civilian life.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
if you go further into the civilian part of the world, things are being done differently. I'm not saying better, I'm not saying worse, but they are being done differently, which is an interesting observation to make. I mean, there's nothing else than that. I mean, as I said, it's not better or worse, it's just different. Anyway, because we're falling silent, is there anything you'd like to add to the reason why we shouldn't call everything PTSD? Or do you have the feeling you've said everything you wanted to say, Dogbath?
Well, I guess I don't know. If you want to be aware of veterans' issues and things, you can look into it. There are services available for, and I'm just thinking for civilians who are interested in this stuff. Maybe you want to volunteer to help out or
That's a good one, actually.
contribute in some way. There are services and charities and groups that already do this. So veterans don't need to be considered like a protected class in the Twitter sphere necessarily. Or if you do, there are ways you can contribute in some way if you're concerned, but they certainly don't need to be treated like I don't know.
You don't have to treat them with silk gloves.
Yeah, it's
That's the one thing I always found funny about the whole SJW bullshit, because they start telling people how not to do certain things because it might be triggering. And my humble opinion
yeah,
is, if you stop doing things because they are triggering for people, that's worse. Now, don't get me wrong, it's terrible if someone gets triggered, but once you know what triggers them, they can actually work on stop being triggered all the time. It takes time, but it needs work. If you avoid triggers, your mind is going to create new triggers.
Really?
yeah. A
Yeah,
big part of
Huh?
the veteran with PTSD problem is feeling isolated from the civilian world that they signed up to protect and to serve.
yeah.
And when they start getting folded into one of these protected classes, like, I don't know, whatever the SJWs are find important
Then all of a
anymore.
sudden you're not part of the society you want to be part of.
Yes. You're not integrating, you're still isolated. It's not, if you want to help, there are ways to help, but you don't need to jump on it like it's the latest transvestite communism nonsense. It's um, it certainly doesn't help them to be considered the other, and there's quite a bit of stigma of being dangerous, which they're not. Um, and that stigma does keep them from seeking help when they do need it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the main thing. If you or anyone you think you know or love might suffer from PTSD, be there for that person, and in all fairness, try to get help. Because PTSD isn't unfair or unreasonable or a big deal, but it is a problem, and you do need to deal with it. And it shouldn't be a stigma.
Well, a
But
lot of mental health issues shouldn't be a stigma for that matter.
fair enough, I totally agree with you on that. But it's beyond stupid that whenever people talk about PTSD, it's because of bullshit happening, like someone killing someone else. And don't get me wrong, I mean there are people with PTSD who have committed who have committed murder to loved ones. Usually they follow that up by committing suicide, though. This
Oh
is
yeah,
this is a genuine problem.
veterans aren't saints. We're
No, we're all
just
people.
like everybody else, but
We're
we
all
just,
people.
in a way, have our own issues, and
Oh,
or
yeah.
maybe
Yeah,
not
so-
even just our own issues, but we're not all
Well,
saints, but we're not all, I don't
Terrible.
know, Rambo.
yeah, well, even if you were Rambo, I mean, the Rambo movie was highly romanticized.
Yeah.
No,
But does that Rambo stuff ever happen that you get so triggered that you're actually back there and stuff? Back in Vietnam, chasing Charlie?
For some people, maybe it can be sort of like that, like losing track of where you are.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's not that adventurous. um, I'd be hard
maybe
pressed to.
considered a psychotic break or something, and has nothing to do with PTSD. Or
Yeah,
to do
indeed.
with PTSD.
Then you're talking more about psychotic episodes. Now, PTSD can trigger psychotic episodes, but then you're no longer talking about PTSD.
Okay.
You're talking about psychotic episodes, and if it happens more often, you're talking about schizophrenia. Again, that's not PTSD, which is also a problem, but at that same time, very well treatable once again. So find help, look for help.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of help out there. Now I'm not quite sure how things are in America because I'm not in America, but I know that in the Netherlands you can actually go to your normal physician, and they will send you to someone if you need help.
Yep.
In America, I have no idea. If there are places, I will link a few things in the description in a moment. If Dogbath have anything for me to link, I will put it down there as well. Because people, if you suffer from PTSD, if you truly suffer from PTSD, it's not a stigma, but find help.
Yep.
I'd just say if you're a veteran and you're having issues of any kind, get in contact with the VA, because as bad a rep as sometimes they earn, and they are actually, there are services if you're having trouble as a veteran.
Yeah. Oh, there's so
So
many
get in contact
organizations.
with them. And there's other things, the American Legion, there's the VFW, there's different groups that will be looking out for you and could possibly help
Yep.
if you're having an issue. And then civilians, maybe look into volunteering for some of them if you're really concerned, but probably the last thing that would be helpful for veterans is civilians talking about veterans on Twitter
Yeah.
without
But,
looking into this stuff beforehand.
oh, okay, so I'm fine.
Oh, I mean, you're welcome to talk about whatever you want, but
No,
I don't know.
I
We're
just
not
think-
transvestite communist
Mhm.
minorities. You know, we're not an SJW protected class. If you want to help, there's ways.
Yep.
If you want to understand it, there's information out there. But if you
Yeah,
just
don't-
want to win Twitter points in arguments,
Yeah, that's a problem.
you're not
Don't-
really appreciated.
Don't talk about how people should avoid triggers. This is
No.
the last thing you should do is avoid triggers. I mean, try to be aware of them and try to recognize how you react to them, but don't avoid them, because if you avoid triggers, this is how problems like agoraphobia get started. Then you have people who are so afraid that they don't even leave their house because, hey, something might happen and it's triggering to them.
Just say discuss it with your doctor if you're having triggers.
Yeah.
Discuss
And
it
also,
with your
in
doctor.
fairness,
Even
Well,
if it's Twitter PTSD, folks.
Amen. Discuss it with your doctor.
this is
Don't ask Twitter for a diagnosis.
yeah. This is something completely off. Well, it's on topic, but of a way lesser magnitude. But when I was a kid, and trust me, kids can have PTSD too. When I was a kid, I was in a car accident, car crash. It's not a big deal. Nothing happened. It was a fender bender, but I was a kid at the time. I'm thinking maybe 6, 7 years old. And it didn't really affect me, or at least if I look back on myself, I never recognized it affected me until I was about 10 years old, and I was scared to go in a car. And for the life of me, no clue why, but I was terrified to go into a car. So my mother was, helping me. We didn't need to go by car, so we went by bus. Eventually, I was afraid to go into the bus. Now, luckily, it didn't last long, and we found help, and we started recognizing, okay, this and this and this. But in your mind, if you avoid triggers, your mind will make up new triggers. This is not even a conscious action. If you avoid triggers, your mind will create new ones for you. Because that's what it needs. The best way to deal with it is to bring it out in the open, make it, cognitive thing, make it part of your memory, a cognitive part of your memory. So when you find certain triggers happening to you, you can recognize, okay, I'm feeling upset, this is why. And then your mindset starts changing. It takes time. I'm oversimplifying it here, but never avoid triggers, because avoiding triggers is not helping anyone.
Kind of sounds the same to me as taking offense to shit.
In a way, it is. In a way, it is. I mean, you have to deal with stuff, and
Yep.
the best way to deal with stuff is to deal with it, not to avoid it.
Oh yeah.
I just add the caveat to the absolute never avoid triggers. I just add the caveat: work with your doctor. If you're having serious triggers,
Yep.
maybe not. Never avoid is not the best way to jump right into things. So just
Well,
work
I
with your
mean,
doctor if you're having
work-
serious issues.
definitely work with your doctor. But if your triggers have become that serious, you've waited too long,
Yeah.
and you started with avoiding them.
Well, and not too long. Just start seeing your doctor.
Yeah, and
You know,
talk
and-
to healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
Don't do it on the internet unless it's me. No, don't do it with me either. To be honest, it's still the internet. Talk to people you can see face to face. I mean, in all fairness, the fun thing about the interwebs is that we can talk easy. The bad thing about the interwebs is that, as how do you call it, practitioner, I cannot see your nonverbal reactions, so it's difficult for me to size up what's going on in your head. People on the internet might give good ideas. They do not make good therapists.
Or lawyers.
Well, yeah. I like to think I'm good at my job, but I can't really do this over the internet. I can talk to you over the internet, but there's a lot of signals I cannot see. Let's say 80 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal. I know there are people who say that's rubbish, but trust me, if it's not 80 to 90%, it's still a lot.
Oh, it's the majority anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, is there anything we want to say still, or did we say everything we wanted to say?
If anyone has questions that I can shed light on, I'd be happy to answer them.
I'm crap at these sort of questions, unfortunately, because I like to think I know everything already, which makes me an idiot. But at the same time, it makes it difficult for me to think of questions. But Smirkers
like to
usually
say,
have great questions.
What?
You have good questions, but you already asked a few. In all fairness,
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've had conversations with a friend of mine and an uncle of mine about the whole veteran thing. And I don't know. I'm just very interested in the subject of especially how soldiers and or warriors way back when all did what they did and came back and how that happened. And yeah. It's like, I think we discussed this in a different stream, but that the World War I and World War II veterans didn't show as much PTSD because they were stuck with each other for quite a long time still before they got home. Then you kind of process it all together in that time. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't know. I wasn't even a glimmer in my dad's eye.
Well,
it's more like today, in like one moment you're in a combat zone and bam, you're back in society. Like fucking a couple hours later. You know?
I'm not sure if that really happens, to be honest. Not to soldiers anyway. Civilians maybe, but
you mean like short tours, shorter than they were in World War I and World War II? Is that what you mean?
It's more like it's more or less because of our technology, we can get everywhere pretty fast.
Oh, yeah.
So 1 week, well, let's say this: like 1 week you're in a war zone, and the next week you're back home and suddenly in civilian life. You know. But way back when, it took much longer to actually come back home. So you kind of process stuff along the way en route back to home before you rejoin society, more or less.
I'm not really sure if that's a good explanation to it, because we know that we had PTSD for as far back as ever.
Yeah.
We can read stories, even if we go back to the Peloponnesian War or the Roman insurgents of the Roman Empire. We know of soldiers suffering from war traumas, which we now call PTSD,
Mhm.
but people already had it. World War One, they called it shell shock, but it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, I know.
Well, there is definitely a culture shock coming out of
Yeah,
it and
yeah.
coming
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. But that's not new, was what I wanted to say. I mean, this is something that happened as far as, because you go from military life to civilian life, and throughout history, once you were a soldier, soldiers always had a different, how do you call it, interaction with each other than civilians did.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Oh,
also
absolutely.
because you have a shared shared viewpoint of the world. I don't know how to say this, but if you have a bunch of people in a room and two of them are soldiers, and people are talking about things that are troubling for them, a soldier can just nod at each other and they will understand each other.
Mhm.
And it's not as if they are great friends or brothers or whatnot, but they have a shared perception, perhaps.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? A Dogbath.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a how do I explain it? Well, I guess after a while, you start to remember how to let your hair grow. But when you first get out, you still can't get used to letting your hair grow long enough to touch your ears. When you see somebody with the same haircut, and pretty right away, you pretty much figure out that they were a soldier or are a soldier, and you know that at the very least, a drill sergeant said that guy would save your life, you know. Whereas you get from you meet a civilian, no drill sergeant ever told me that that guy would save my life, you know,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
pinch. If that helps explain it, maybe that doesn't. Maybe that makes it more
Yeah, it does.
confusing.
It does.
Mhm.
But it's a group mentality. It's cult mentality. It's wolf pack mentality, if you will. Because this is true for servicemen, but you can see the same. I used to hang out with bikers when I was younger, and I had a good time with them. Don't get me wrong. Never a negative word about them. But people often looked at them negatively because, well, bikers do have a negative um, name, or people look at it in a weird way. But as you said now, I mean, I know a lot of bikers who would have said, if I'm in a pub and a biker from another biker group would be there, I would still prefer company to him than to all the other people out there. Because that guy, he might hit me, but if shit hits the fan, he stands with me.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good way to good comparison. Yeah.
And this is yeah. But that's also well, as I
Well,
said,
what-
a wolf pack mentality.
That,
I mean,
that's sort of what I was meaning anyway. The tribe mentality, more or less.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I still need to get and read the book, but the Sebastian younger fella, he wrote a book about tribes and stuff,
Mhm.
and how it used, like way back when, it was a little easier for the warriors to rejoin their society because they
Yeah.
were sort of venerated, you know.
That's the only reason why it was easier, because people recognized the sacrifice they did for their society, and therefore
Yep.
people would expect and accept certain
Well-
of their weird behaviors.
He'd also say like, oh fuck, what was it? The Native Americans or something? They would go to war with each other, come back home. Week later, they were pretty much just in tribal life again, and
Yeah.
then that would happen over and over and over again. You know?
Yeah, well, we saw
Well,
the
now
same.
now you go to war and you come back, and it seems like no one gives a fuck. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but we saw the same during World War One. I mean, Soldiers, and this is something a lot of people don't understand. There are different reasons why soldiers fight, but mostly soldiers fight because they're told to. And for example, we saw this during World War One, where the most famous story of that is how soldiers from the German army, and I think the French army, were pretty close entrenched during Christmas, and they celebrated Christmas together.
Yep.
Because there was no one else to celebrate it with. And you know what? We're all soldiers, and tomorrow we will fight again, but we're still all men.
Yep.
And throughout history, there have been a lot of stories of soldiers who would try to kill each other during the wars, but after the wars could sit with each other and talk to each other. And okay, some of them would definitely hold a grudge, but a lot of soldiers didn't even hold a grudge because they recognized, shit is as shit was.
Yep.
I mean, we were told to fight each other, but now no one is telling us to fight, so we don't have to fight.
Yep.
Now, there's a small difference, though, because if we look at modern warfare, or what we now call warfare, a lot of soldiers fight. On one side, soldiers fight because they get told to do so by the government, but on the other side, people fight because they feel, how do you call this, ideologically driven. So there is a different mindset. I mean, for example, if we look at the fight in what we see in the Middle East now, with ISIS on one side and normal soldiers on the other side, we also see rebels on the other side, mind you. But soldiers who fight against ISIS do so because they were being told this is a target, we need to fight them. ISIS fights those soldiers because of a holy war. They feel they have a right. They don't feel it's an order. They don't feel it's a human asking them to do something. Where a normal fighter, a normal soldier, will be able to stand down after a war and learn to live with other people. People who are ideologically driven don't. Because the war never ends for people who are ideologically driven.
Yeah.
But sidetracked, sorry. Feel free to explain to me why you think I'm wrong or right, by the way, Dogbath.
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't speculate what was going through Haji's head. Or, well,
yeah, unfortunately, I
is that
can't.
racism? I don't know.
No, it's not racism. No. I don't really believe racism is disliking someone over their race, not over their ideology.
Yeah, I don't really mind if it's racism or not.
Yeah, I never really understood how.
But I couldn't really speak to what was going through their head. I had some interaction with the civilians over there, but never friendly interactions with the enemy.
No,
would I in 30 years? I kind of doubt it, but maybe. I don't know.
Well, if we look, for example, if we look at soldiers, I mean, you're a soldier, yeah. One of the biggest military failures of America was Vietnam, and I'm not going to try to bash America over Vietnam. Don't get me wrong, but can we agree that Vietnam was a military failure for the USA?
Well, yeah, it wasn't a success.
Okay. Yet a lot of soldiers who fought in Vietnam were able to meet people from Vietnam after the war and interacted on a human basis. They weren't still engaged with each other. They weren't still at war with each other. Now, there is an exception to that rule, and that were the ones that were ideologically driven. Now, the Viet Cong was ideologically driven from communism. Those people held the grudge. But soldiers, on average, didn't hold the grudge. Not even the soldiers from the North Vietnamese army. And there have been plenty of stories how North Vietnamese soldiers met with American soldiers well after the war. I'm not saying 2 weeks after the war, well after the war. And they were still able to talk to each other like humans. There was no fight between them because both of them recognized, okay, we were soldiers. we were not fighting because we hate each other. We were fighting because that's what we do. That's our job. Now, ideologically driven soldiers, for example, Viet Cong soldiers who were truly communistic, they could not let go of their ideology. Therefore, you might have been a soldier once, you're still a soldier. Hell, you don't even have to be a soldier. If you agree with soldiers, therefore, you are a target. And this sort of ideological thinking we saw with the Viet Cong, we still see now with, for example, how do you call it?
The Hajis.
The jihadi fighters, the Mujahideen, ISIS, whatever. They still have the same mindset. There is no peace with them because even if you lay down your weapons, you pick them up in the first place. Therefore, you will always be a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of like fighting fanatics. Pretty much.
Yeah, it's
I would imagine
fanatics.
anyway.
No, it is.
Yeah.
It's fighting. I'm sorry. I see in the chat, staying free MGTOW. Hi there, by the way. I didn't say hi there here. I did say hi on the chat. He says, we don't talk about such things here in America. We won that. I'm not quite sure what you mean with that, mate. Do you mean that people don't talk about the Vietnam War and how that turned to shit, or how soldiers act after wars? Because in all fairness, even soldiers, tainted as they may be after a war, are still human beings.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, you meant Nam. Okay, fair enough. Well, it's funny that we don't talk about it a lot. But what we see, and we don't just see it in Vietnam, we saw it in Europe as well. After the Second World War, you had German army, the Wehrmacht, and you had the SS. SS was ideologically driven. The Wehrmacht wasn't. They're just the army. And you can already see a lot of soldiers from the Wehrmacht during the Second World War, but also after the Second World War, could talk in a normal way and with normal people about the other side. The same is true for a lot of ideological fighting people on the Allies side. They never say a good thing about Germans. Whereas most soldiers were just soldiers. They can recognize that some of them were good and some of them were bad. For example, I've never read so much praise for General Rommel as I did when I read about General Rommel in English documents. English soldiers, English generals, English, I mean, even Churchill, they were all talking with the highest honors about General Rommel, even though he was their enemy. But they had respect for him. Now, during the war, they will do anything they can to stop him. But after the war, they have time to recognize, okay, well, yes, we hated the guy, but why did we hate him? Because he was so goddamn good.
I'd say a lot of it would be dependent on there ever being a foreseeable peace over there, which I can't even fathom that happening at this point. And maybe during these other conflicts in the past, people didn't think that was possible either. Right now, I couldn't even imagine what a peace with the Islamists or Islam or the Muslims, I don't know what a peace with them would look like at this point.
Yeah, unfortunately, it can't happen. Don't get me wrong. I want to make very clear there's a difference between Muslims and Islam. There is no peace with Islam. There can be a peace with Muslims because Muslims are people, but there cannot be a peace with Islam because Islam quite clearly says that if you are a good Muslim, you have to fight the unbeliever. Okay, everyone that is not a good Muslim is an unbeliever. If you do not fight the unbeliever, that means that you either have a very good reason not to fight him, or you're an unbeliever yourself. This is why, and this is something a lot of people see but fail to recognize, this is why most of the people dying from Islamic suicide bombers are Muslims. But they're the wrong kind of Muslims. This is why, for example, we see a war in Mali where Sufi Muslims and Sunni Muslims are fighting for survival. Actually, the Sufis are fighting for survival. The Sunnis are attacking them. Because Sunnis think Sufi are the wrong kind of Muslim. This is why we see a bombing in Pakistan by ISIS, which is Sunni, of a Sufi temple, because Sufi are the wrong kind of Muslims. This is why Shia and Sunni are fighting with each other for as long as the world has gone on. Well, not the world, but as long as as long as the shift between Sunni and Shia exists, there never has been peace between those two groups of Islam.
Dude, could you imagine this, if Christians did that to each other?
There was a time that Christians...
You're a Catholic. I'm going to bomb the fuck out of you. You're a Protestant. I'm going to bomb the fuck out of you.
Well, but...
Oh, shit, we need to gang up on this West Baptist church.
Yeah, it never went that far. It happened for a while, to be honest, because that's what Spanish Inquisition was all about.
Huh.
Though, and this is something a lot of people fail to recognize about the Spanish Inquisition. Sorry, I was talking away from the microphone. This is something a lot of people fail to realize about the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition started to cleanse the country from Muslims. Because, well, Spain had endured Muslim occupation for quite a long time, actually. Anyway, we're going pretty broadly off topic here.
Yep.
But I love to talk history. I consider myself rather good at talking about history, but that's bullshit because that's not what we were on about. If we don't have anything more to say on the topic of PTSD and our servicemen, maybe it's time to say bye-bye.
Yeah, sure.
Dogbath?
All right. Well, thanks for having me on.
I
hope I can make an interesting conversation.
I'm grateful that you came on, and I'm really hoping that we might return to this subject one day, because I really think this is an awareness thing. And my channel isn't the biggest, but I might be able to help you talk on someone else's channel in the future, if you are okay with that. Because I really do think that people should hear the stories, the reality of PTSD. Because for too long, the narrative has been driven by school children talking about how they suffer from PTSD and therefore the world needs to change. When in reality...
Always the old school stigma of PTSD being dangerous.
Well, I don't mind the stigma of PTSD being dangerous, but the bullshit, what everything can constitute PTSD, is pretty annoying.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to say thank you for everyone in the chat that came. It's not very crowded. I am partly to blame for that. No, it's not true. I'm completely to blame for that because I didn't advocate the stream well. I thought I did. I fucked up. I'm sorry for that, but it will stay on and people can see it later. It's not that long a stream, so I'm pretty sure people will look at it later, or at least I hope so. I'd like to thank you, Dogbath, very much for coming. I'd like to thank you very much for coming, Smirkus. Do you have any last words? And I'll start with you, Dogbath.
I don't know. Chatelet. That'll do.
That'll do. Smirkus, you got anything?
Well, thanks for having me as always, and I guess we'll catch y'all later.
And well, this was Modwayne. I thank you very much for joining us, and see you all later. And I'm going to end the broadcast now.